Tales from the Middle East. The Stork Caliph from Iraq. There once was a caliph, grand ruler of the ancient Baghdad, who enjoyed a long beard, a golden water pipe, the love of his people, and a cook who prepared the most luscious fish ever known. Moreover, this remarkable caliph could sit for hours on one leg, with the other thrust straight out before him. He could repeat the whole of the Koran, and he could tell his subjects exactly the core of their heated discussions in the bazaar the day before. The people of Baghdad whispered that their caliph had 20 eyes and 30 ears. Every morning the caliph received petitioners in his great palace, but during the afternoon he was not to be seen by any man, for he gave out the word that he spent the latter part of the day in siesta. But the citizens of Baghdad did not know of a tiny door which led from the palace into a quiet lane. "Come, Ali ben Manzar," called the caliph to his grand vizier. "It is time for us to collect news of our subjects. We will go into the bazaar." Ali ben Manzar picked up 2 merchants' costumes, which speedily changed the mighty caliph and his vizier into dealers in silks, and they went into the city of Baghdad, as was their secret custom. But as they turned towards the city, an old peddler, withered as a brown leaf, glanced at them keenly once before he dropped his eyelids and thrust under their noses, with his shaking claw, a handsome jeweled box. The caliph halted, attracted by its beauty. "What are you selling, father?" he inquired. "Snuff boxes, worthy caliph." "How much do you charge for them?" "1 piece of gold, glorious caliph." The caliph threw him 2 pieces of gold and took the snuff-box. It glittered and sparkled in the late afternoon sun as the caliph and his vizier walked away. Presently they came to a quiet lake on the outskirts of the city, and the caliph, who felt somewhat fatigued, thought it would be well perhaps to rest on the shore for a time, before returning by way of the bazaars to his palace. He held out the snuff-box and laughed. "I have brought this box for 2 pieces of gold, and should like a sniff. I shall see if it contains snuff." He opened the lid and saw the tiny opening filled with a brownish dust. But as the caliph reached for a pinch, he perceived a small piece of parchment fitted neatly into the inside of the lid. He drew it forth cautiously, and found it to be folded 3 times. He slowly read aloud, "A sniff of snuff gives thee wings. A cry salaver gives 3 hands." "Ah," said the vizier, thinking this a fine joke. "The box is magic, glorious caliph. Let us try the snuff." "But," objected the caliph, "do you believe that the written word here can bring us back to our own shapes?" "Why not?" shrugged the vizier. "If the snuff gives us wings, so must the word give us our hands." The caliph was sorely tempted. He looked into the cloudless sky, and longed to fly there high above his city of Baghdad. He took a pinch of snuff and held out the box to his grand vizier, who likewise raised a few grains to his nostrils. They sniffed long and loud. There was a sudden rustling, a feathery stirring, and the caliph saw before him a large stork, standing with wings outspread. He opened his mouth to laugh and to say, "So the charm worked for you, Ali ben Manzar." But all that came from the mouth of the caliph was a hoarse "Kalaa! Kalaa!" The vizier flapped his wings and opened his beak widely, but all that he said was "Kalaa! Kalaa!" However, having become birds, the caliph and his grand vizier understood the language of the air. "Kalaa! Kalaa! Let us fly above the lake," squeaked the caliph. "Kalaa! Kalaa!" "That is a good idea," clacked the grand vizier. And so they spread their wide white wings and soared, with a rare taste of freedom, above the water and across the city, where the caliph saw his people praying and sleeping, talking and fighting, selling and buying. He observed with his small eyes the servants of his palace and the soldiers of his army. "Truly," thought the flying caliph, "a stork of the air knows more of my city than I do." As evening drew close about the large birds, the grand vizier swooped near enough to his master to screech into his face, "Glorious caliph, we must return to the palace, for night draws near, and we shall be missed." The Caliph, so much was he enjoying his flight, did not wish to return, but he felt, with a sigh, that Ali Ben Manzar was right. They wheeled with a sweep of rustling wings toward the secluded lake, where they settled to earth and stood on their long and spindling legs. The Caliph, who had hidden his snuff-box under a low bush, drew it forth, and read again the magic word. He raised his beak. "Salve," he croaked, and turned his eyes toward his Grand Vizier, expecting to see before him the brown, familiar face and turbaned head of Ali Ben Manzar. But the Caliph could scarcely stand in his amazement, for the Grand Vizier was not there. There was only the big feathered form of a stork. "Salve!" he cried in horror. "Salve! Salve!" But storks they remained. The Grand Vizier was terrified. He slapped his wings and ruffled his feathers, and stood first on one foot and then on the other. He opened his pointed beak and uttered a cry. "Salve! Salve!" The smooth water of the lake showed not a ripple, and the air echoed the sounds of two storks, who seemed beside themselves with terror. They flew about, filling the evening with raucous noises and broken feathers which they tore out in their frenzy. Then they grew tired and decided to settle down quietly and talk the situation over. "Ali Ben Manzar," spoke the Stork Caliph, "it seems that some enemy has contrived to outwit us. What can be done to relieve our plight?" "Noble Caliph," answered the weary Vizier, "I know of nothing. We must continue to live as birds until we can discover the right word to bring us back to our own shapes." And so the Caliph of Baghdad and his Grand Vizier searched hungrily among the reeds, where they thrust their long beaks into the silent water and plucked forth their meal of fish. As the moon rose above the city of Baghdad, it stared in surprise at two large storks which slept, side by side, in the shallows of the lake. At the earliest gleam of grey dawn, the Caliph and his Grand Vizier spread their wings and soared anxiously above Baghdad to observe what excitement was caused by their disappearance. They settled above the palace to watch the wild astonishment of the courtiers and the servants, who searched in every possible corner of the grounds and gardens, as well as the buildings. The Caliph swooped low to hear what they were shouting. "Ah!" cried a slave, "the very birds of the air come to help us seek our master, who must have been seized by demons." The Caliph flew away, somewhat consoled, for he knew that the people grieved for him. The next morning the officials of the palace were obliged to announce in the marketplace that the Lord Caliph and his Grand Vizier had disappeared, no man knew where. There rose to the storks overhead a prolonged cry of grief and terror, which filled the heavens like a roll of thunder. The birds went again to their lake, and every night they slept on one leg after a supper of fish. Weeks passed, and as the storks still flew about the city anxiously. One day, as they sailed slowly above a highway which led from the neighboring kingdom into Baghdad, the birds saw below them a long procession of riders, decked in brilliant silks, who sat upon camels and horses which trailed colorful shawls in the dust of the road. Servants and slaves walked beside the riders. The Caliph grew suspicious. He swooped quickly down until his wings almost brushed the astonished head of the first horseman, who wore the robes of a prince. The Caliph rose again, uttering a harsh clack from his open beak. "Ali Ben Manzar," he cried, "this prince is no other than the son of Kadur, who has always wished us ill. I think little good can come of his arrival in our leaderless Baghdad." All the way to the city the storks flew around and around in the air. When the procession reached the palace and went confidently through its gates, the storks flapped their wings wildly. The Caliph watched, almost holding his breath, and saw the doors swing open. From the palace came a body of courtiers and retainers, followed by slaves, who bowed to the ground before the prince. The lord inclined his head haughtily and spoke. "My noble father, Kadur Khan of the neighboring kingdom, has received word that your exalted Caliph and ruler of Baghdad is dead. Knowing that the august Caliph had no heirs, the Khan has sent me, his youngest son, to live in your city and be your lord." The palace officials bowed respectfully, while from the crowd, which had followed the strangers through the streets and was now jammed about the gates, came a long shout of joy. "Long live the new Caliph!" "Come," spoke the vizier, "it does not avail us to remain here now. Our city is lost, for the son of Kadur Khan can only be an evil man. Let us fly to the deep forest where we may find our sleep." Over the lake the big bird sailed, and beyond the hills to a forest, which was cool and dark and quiet, and which filled them with a sad peace. They lived on small fish from a brook, and they did not speak of Baghdad or of the new Caliph. When some months had passed, the Grand Vizier, as was his usual daily habit, was searching out food. He had left the Caliph standing mournfully on one leg to follow a tiny, tender, green frog, which eluded him hop after hop. The Grand Vizier found himself suddenly in a distant part of the wood, which neither of the storks had ever visited before. Not a ray of sunshine penetrated the dark green depths. Nothing moved. There seemed to be no faintest breeze. An absolute silence enveloped the forest like a smothering veil. The Vizier shivered, and could not restrain a jump of fright when he heard a sharp sound. It seemed to be a quick tapping immediately before him, but he could see nothing. Quietly the stork moved forward, and was instantly relieved to perceive that the noise was made by a woodpecker, whose red head moved spasmodically up and down as she drove her little beak into the bark of a tree. Ali Ben Manzar stared, and was amazed, for as the little bird prodded methodically into the trunk, large round tears rolled from her eyes and dropped with tiny splashes on the leaves. The Grand Vizier quietly withdrew, and returned to his master to tell him what he had seen. Flying across the top of trees, the two storks went back to the quiet spot to observe the woodpecker together. The Caliph, who had thought that nothing could surprise him again, was astonished to see the small bird with tears rolling from its eyes. He advanced. "Good woodpecker," he clacked, "can you understand the words of Stork?" The little bird turned her brilliant head towards the intruders. "Who are you?" she chirped. "Then you understand our language. Oh, this is indeed fortunate. Why do you weep as you search for worms?" the Caliph asked. "Ah," answered the bird in a voice choked with sobs, "I have good cause to weep, Stork. You have always been a bird, and no doubt you enjoy this life, but I am forced to go in this disguise of my true self." The storks fluttered their wings excitedly. "What is the matter, woodpecker?" inquired the Caliph kindly. "I have been turned into a woodpecker by the sorceries of an evil man, Kadur Khan, who lives in the kingdom which borders this forest." "So Kadur is a sorcerer," murmured the stork. "What can be done to change you to your original shape?" "Because I refuse to marry the evil son of the sorcerer, my fate is to remain a woodpecker until a man in human form asks me to marry him, and that can never be." The woodpecker turned her little red head, and the storks again saw tears spilling from her eyes. "In addition to my harsh fate," sobbed the small bird, "I am forced to listen night after night to the devilish incantations of 3 wizards who meet with the Khan in this enchanted wood." "Where do they meet?" asked the Caliph. The woodpecker nodded her head toward the south. "Straight through the trees, where a circle of grass is open to the sky." She resumed her tapping with a deep sigh. The Caliph nodded to his Grand Vizier, and, with a great flapping of wings, the 2 storks flew south. In the midst of the thick forest they saw beneath them a small circle of green. The big birds came to earth and hopped into the surrounding underbrush, where they hid themselves. All day they stayed there, and when the moon flooded the grassy circle with pale light, they were rewarded for their patience. 3 men stealthily crept forward and sat with legs crossed in a circle, where they were joined by 2 others, who were swathed in dark cloaks. The Caliph nodded to his companion when he caught a glimpse of the squinting eyes of the Khan and the haughty profile of the young prince, the new Caliph of Baghdad. "My son," muttered the Khan in a low voice, "how does the city of Baghdad receive you?" "How should it receive me?" asked the young man. "I am the master there. The people are not so joyful as they were when I first arrived, but they obey. But I would like to know how you disposed of the Caliph." The old man grinned slyly. "I can tell you now that my plans have worked so well. Disguised as a peddler, I sold to the Caliph and his Grand Vizier a magic snuff-box, the contents of which transformed them into storks. They tried it out, thinking the magic a fine joke, but also believing that the word written within the lid would change them once again to men. But I prevented that. I substituted one letter in the word. I wrote Salave instead of Shalave. They must remain forever storks." The sun laughed evilly. The storks had heard enough. As soon as they could emerge without being seen, they flew back to the tree of the little woodpecker, where they had scarcely regained their footing before they repeated the magic word. They found themselves once more the Caliph and his Grand Vizier. The woodpecker looked on amazed. Then the Caliph, in all his dignity, bowed low to the small bird, and spoke. "Fair woodpecker, I have come to ask your hand in marriage." Before the eyes of the men the bird vanished, and they saw a slender princess, with joyful eyes, standing among the trees. She inclined her head. "O noble lord," she murmured, "you have made my life once more my own. Therefore I give it into your keeping." The Caliph and the Vizier walked, on one side of each other, and the lovely princess, until they came to the city of Baghdad. When the people saw their kind master striding through the streets as if he had never been away, they were filled with awe and prostrated themselves to pray before him. But the Caliph did not stop. He came to the gates of the palace, where the Grand Vizier cried to the keeper, "Behold, your master has returned. Open unto him." The people of Baghdad, weary of the constant hauteur and cruelty of the new lord, set up a great shout of welcome. The keeper flung wide the gates, and the soldiers assembled around their Caliph. The son of Qadir Khan was seized and bound and sent back to his wicked father. In 7 days the wedding of the woodpecker maiden and the stork Caliph was celebrated with great joy by the people. But the Caliph no longer sat on one leg. He folded both his legs beneath him, and in all the peaceful days of his life he could not look with pleasure upon fish. He ordered his cooks never to allow fish in the city of Baghdad for 100 years and a day, and this command was feelingly enforced, as long as he lived, by his Grand Vizier.